Now sometimes in factoring we take something, for example, 12 is 3 times 4, and then we take the 4 and factor it again. So that this 2 goes into 12, and this 2 goes into 12, and I'll get 3. That's kind of what we're going to do next. We have two things that both go in to this. As a reminder, we're missing a third degree term and a first degree term, x to the first, or just x by itself. So I'm going to start by dividing by x minus 2, that goes here, into the original, which I'll write out like this. So of course, to make the x to the fourth, let's put that here, I need an x cubed here, because x cubed times x is x to the fourth. X to the third times negative 2 is negative 2x to the third. Third thing I fill in. And then this red bubble has to make 0, so that negative 2x to the third, I need a positive 2x to the third here. That's the fourth thing I need. To make that 2x to the third, there's an x here, so this has to be 2x to the second, the fifth thing I fill in. Well then, 2x to the second times this negative 2 is negative 4x to the second, the sixth thing I fill in. To make this green, negative 13x squared, I already have the negative 4x squared, I need negative 9 more x squared. That's the seventh step I fill in. To make that negative 9x squared, I have the x already. This has to be a negative 9x, the eighth thing I fill in. Then I use the table negative 9x times the negative 2 is our 18x, the ninth thing I fill in. The x term has to be 0. Well, if I have negative 18x here, this has to be a negative 18x, the 10th thing I fill in. To make this negative 18x, with this x here, I need a negative 18 here, the 11th thing I fill in. And again, surprise, 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 negative 18 times the negative 2 gives us our 36, which is the last term. So then for the moment, I have the x to the fourth minus 13x squared plus 36. That's the same thing as x minus 2 times x cubed plus 2x squared minus 9x minus 18. The x minus 2 comes from there, and the x cubed plus 2x squared minus 9x minus 18 comes from the quotient position. Now here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to take this and factor it again using the x plus 2. So this x plus 2 is also a factor. So then I'm going to have the x minus 2 from the previous step. I'm going to have the x plus 2 from this step, and I'm going to get something left. So then to make this x cubed, it's here, step 1. There's an x here, so this has to be x squared, step 2. If this is x squared, then this is 2x squared, step 3. To make this 2x squared, I already have it. So this needs to be a 0x squared. Step 4. To make that 0x squared from x, this has to be 0x. Step 5. And then 0x times 2 is still 0x. Step 6. So hopefully the zeros make it easy, but it can also be complicated if you're not careful. To make this negative 9x, I have a 0x here. I need a negative 9x here. Step 7. To make that negative 9x from this x, I need a negative 9 here. Step 8. And then negative 9 times 2 is negative 18. Again, surprise, surprise, surprise. Step 9. So in this previous step, we factored out an x minus 2. This time we factored an x plus 2. And this polynomial is the second remaining factor. And of course, we can factor that again. So that this becomes x minus 2, x plus 2, x plus 3, x minus 3. So here we are with the 4 factors. We factored this out. This part was left in our last step. If I plug in 2, I get 0. If I plug in negative 2, I'll also get 0. You can see the same thing for 3 and negative 3. The same is true if we're dividing by something a bit more complicated. It really isn't. Fortunately, math is very consistent. Here is our divisor, the factor that we know. We still need to make the x to the 4th. X squared times x squared will make the x to the 4th. So that's the first step, even though they filled it in for us. Here is the second. Now that I have x squared, I can multiply here and get the negative 2x cubed. And multiply here and get the 5x squared. I need to make the x cubed. I already have a negative 2x cubed. I need a 3x cubed. Add them together to make the x cubed. So that's my step 5. To make that 3x cubed from this x squared, this had to be a 3x. Step 6. Once I have this 3x, I can multiply by this negative 2x and get negative 6x squared. Step 7. And I can also multiply this 3x by this 5 and get 15x. Step 8. Now a little bit longer, this green bubble has two things already, 5x squared and negative 6x squared. That's negative 1x squared. To make our negative 5x squared, I need a negative 4 more x squareds. Step 9. To make that negative 4x squared from this x squared, I needed a negative 4. Step 10. And then I can take that negative 4, multiply by the negative 2x, and get 8x. Step 11. And I can take that negative 4, multiply by the 5, and get negative 20. Step 12. And fortunately, this blue bubble matches that position, and the last bubble, of course, matches the last position. Now, if you remember in the previous problem, we divide it by x minus 2, and then x plus 2, one after the other. Well, if I multiply them together, I'll get x squared minus 4, which means that these two are in there at the same time. So why don't we divide by this, which is the same thing as dividing by this, and then this. And voila, we get the x squared minus 9 again. I won't go through all the steps because hopefully by now the area method should be pretty clear. And we're back to what we had in that previous example. The same for